All right.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to the Old and In the Way comedy podcast with Bob and Mark, where we fight ageism one bad joke at a time. Our mission is that reluctantly we found ourselves to be quite old and have learned the hard way that repression and denial are not enough to hold back the tides of reality before we get our tickets punched. Our mission is clear. We will pull the veil back and take a shot at all the absurd and real aspects of growing old. Political correctness be damned. But before we get started, we'd like to thank our fictitious sponsor, Smart Again, for their support. Remembering? Smart Again is a brain supplement that will have you wondering how you got to be so damn smart. Again, Smart Again uses all unnatural ingredients that will have you incessantly bragging about your high IQ level at the next Mensa meeting. When I first heard about Smart Again, I couldn't believe it, but after a few days of taking Smart Again, I've been able to find my car in the parking lot most of the time. Stay tuned to this podcast for more information about this fine product that doesn't really exist. And ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Jeff Burkhart, author, bartender extraordinaire. And if you give me half a second. How about that for professionalism? Jeff Burkhart is both an award-winning journalist and an award-winning bartender. His popular Barfly column in the Marin Independent Journal was voted best column in California in both 2014 and 2021. And he himself has been voted best bartender 7 times by the readers of 3 different publications. His 2 books, 20 Years Behind Bars, The Spirited Adventures of a Real Bartender, and its sequel, 20 Years Behind Bars, Parole Denied, are both bestsellers. And yet he still finds time to host the Barfly podcast on iTunes, which has been featured in both Marin Magazine and the New York Times, all of which has resulted in Jeff also being voted best media personality, TV, radio, print, twice in a row by the readers of the Pacific Suns. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Burkhart. How are you, Jeff?
I'm good, Mark. Nice to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. I've enjoyed rereading my little thing on the Tequila Sunrise.
Yeah, great story.
How did you get started becoming an author? How did you get started becoming a bartender?
Well, they both kind of went hand in hand. I originally gone to college to become a communications major, which anyone who has a communications degree knows that's almost as good as an English degree, right? The field is so broad, right? I mean, nowadays.
Good enough for me.
Yes, but so anyhow, along that path, I started bartending to make ends meet. And then at some point, I took a college magazine writing class where the assignment was an overheard conversation. And so the point was to go somewhere and listen to someone's conversation and write a story about it. And I thought, I don't have to go anywhere. People are coming right to me and sitting right in front of me. So I turned that idea into a column, which then based on my bartending experience, and that kind of snowballed and created the book and all the rest of it, which has been quite a bit of fun.
Nice snowball.
Yeah.
It was really interesting when you first reached out to me when you were working on the National Geographic assignment, and you had seen my blog. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that you also questioned it. And then a year went by after our interview, and I was wondering what happened. And then Keith Richards' book came out, and I reread it again last night, and it's just a great piece that you put together, and it's a wonderful article.
Well, it certainly had legs, that's for sure. You know, I knew the story when you told me. I mean, of course, people tell bartenders and journalists all kinds of stories all the time, and I always loved Stephen Colbert's truthiness thing, right, where it has the ring of truth, but doesn't have any actual truth. And one of the interesting things, of course, about the Tequila Sunrise thing is all the facts kind of lined up. The only thing I needed was verification from the Rolling Stones, right? That something like that had happened. And of course, I reached out to them, and the reason it took a year is I never heard back, obviously. But then ironically, when Keith Richards' book came out, what it was, a chapter 3 or something,
chapter 9, paragraph 1, sentence 1.
Yep. the cocaine and tequila sunrise story. You can't get any more verification than that. And then of course they released their own Cuervo tequila based on that. And then of course Cuervo did a series of commercials and videos all based on that story. As
Of
you
which
know, I
I
still
got to be in one of them.
yes, and you know, and you were the impetus for the whole thing because you know it was our lunch down there at the Trident, and you know we talked about a lot of things that day, Robin Williams and all kinds of things. But that was for me, it was ironic because I had just gone to Japan to do a story about Japanese whiskey, and here the best story I think I've ever done or been privy to tell was the one in my own backyard, literally 2 miles from where I work.
It was more fun than I can tell you. And Bobby Losoff, who is the creator of the modern version of the Tequila Sunrise,
Yep.
filling this in for our audience. You really turned his life around. He's now a retired person in Hawaii, and he's still playing on this string and
Yeah.
getting mileage out of it.
Well, it was unfortunate.
And I'm happy for him. You
Yes.
made him a celebrity in his old age, and he's
Well,
thrilled.
Well, he deserves it. You know, I mean, he was kind of cut out of the picture in the first part of the story when Cuervo originally in the '70s, you know, put the tequila sunrise recipe on the back of their bottle, and they kind of omitted him from the story, right? And so it was nice to be able to put him back in. And you know, again, you know, it's rare that you get to meet, you know, Ian Fleming or Hemingway and ask them what the hell they meant by that. Where Bobby is one of the few people with whatever you think of the tequila sunrise as a drink, and I argue that the original version is far better than the one most people are familiar with. But the original one had cassis and lime and grenadine and orange, and that's a delicious drink even to this day, and I still make it for people. But the point being is that you know it is one of it. If you have to name three tequila cocktails, you get two out, margarita and maybe a Paloma, and then you're stuck. And the tequila
Pretty
sunrise
much.
is the only one next, and I've seen it on menus all over the world, which is, you know, truly a testament.
Let me dial Bob back into this because in your email you mentioned that you had interviewed Barney
Yeah, Mike Varney. Yeah,
and you had a Marty Ballin story. And so our audience knows that Bob is the co-author of the rock opera Rock Justice that he co-created with Marty Ballin of the Jefferson Airplane and Jefferson Starship. Bob, you're on. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
well, we can go with Bob. Why don't you give us a little background on Rock Justice?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. I was in law school, and what we studied in our music law class was the eternal litigation of the Jefferson Airplane against their first manager, a guy named Matthew Cates, who also ripped off Moby Grape. And the professor came in excited one day and said, "Class, Buckwell versus Cates in its, I think, 18th year of litigation is actually having a jury trial down the street. You guys don't have to come to class. You can go to the courtroom." And lo and behold, there was the airplane members talking about what had happened when Matthew Cates had forced them to or enticed them to sign a contract with him, saying that RCA wouldn't sign them unless they signed that contract, which wasn't true. And many of the questions that were asked by the lawyers was answered with, "I don't know, we took a lot of acid that year." But everybody was there pretty much, and I wound up meeting Marty and Paul and those guys. And I had come from working for the National Geographic, coincidentally, for
Wow.
that video disc, which was supposed to be the next big thing, which of course it didn't turn out to be. And the Starship recorded for RCA, who were also excited about video disc. And Marty and I had the idea of writing a rock opera to be a video disc, and inspired by this courtroom trial, wrote Rock Justice, which was the story of a rock singer who falls asleep and has a nightmare that his own band puts him on trial for not having a hit. And we wound up putting that on, but we also, at Marty's suggestion, enlisted Mike Varney to be both the prosecuting guitarist and co-composer. And Jeff, what's your Marty story and your Varney story?
Well, Mike, I went to San Francisco State, and one of my professors there was Don Menn, who was the founder of Guitar Player magazine, and he had hired Mike Varney to write a column called, I think it was a Guitar Spotlight, if I remember correctly. And Mike, being the clever guy that he is, used his connections with talking to all these people to actually sign these artists to a record label that he created called Shrapnel Records. And so Shrapnel Records was initially a mail order record company that had all these up and coming rock guitar players. And so, you know, he had met them all through Guitar Player magazine. So I got to hear both sides of that when I was doing a story about Mike, because he lived here in Nevada. I think he's moved now to Vegas. But about how that all happened. And he has quite a long history, and he's not only an accomplished guitar player in his own right, but he's a great judge of talent. Yeah. And he has assembled a huge amount of people on several different record labels that he now owns. Blues International, I think it is, and Shrapnel, of course. And so it was a fascinating story to hear from both sides, because I could talk to both sides of the equation on a friendly basis, because I knew both of them. So I did a definitive biography on him, and it was quite entertaining, because it's one of those times where when you sit down, like when I did the Tequila Sunrise story, I talked to Bobby Lozoff, and when he said, "Oh, would you like to verify that with the Stones tour manager from that era?" And I said, "Yeah, I would." And so he put me in touch with Jerry Pompili.
Oh, wow.
Who was, I had a half an hour interview with him about Bobby Lozoff, and then 2 hours on the phone talking about his experiences in the south of France with the Rolling Stones. Right. So it's those kind of connections that as a journalist don't get into the story, but are invaluable on a personal level, because all those things, I went to San Francisco State because Don Men was there, and because the dean of students had written for Rolling Stone magazine, dean of journalism had written for Rolling Stone magazine, when I really appreciated Rolling Stone magazine, and I loved his writing style. So that was one of the reasons I gravitated to that. And then later on, be able to meet a lot of these people as a result of that has been fabulous. So the Marty Balin story is not so much my story, but my wife is actually a singer and had an album released in the 80s and called Temptation. Her name's Holly Stanton. And she had gone to Marty Balin's house on a date, I believe. It's, those kind of stories are always a little vague when you're telling your significant other, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And because I guess the guitar player wanted to impress her, and she didn't like Marty Balin, and she didn't like his music. She didn't know him. And so when she got there, he said something about miracles, and she said, "Well, whenever I hear that song, it makes me want to run screaming from the room."
Whoa.
So he asked her to leave, which is my Marty Balin story, which wow. I think it's time for you to go now. So hilarious story. I just did an event with the Modern Starship, which is just Freiburg, I believe, at this point, yeah. And some other characters at the great chefs and wineries, but they can still knock it out of the park, I tell you.
Is Prairie in the band now?
No, it was the other one, Donnie Baldwin, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but it's I forget the singer's name, but she's she did some stuff, I believe, with Big Brother and some other things. She's fairly accomplished, and I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but they were good. Freiburg can still play.
I love the story. I need to just one little Mike Varney aside. I had met Mike when he was in high school, when he was in a punk band called the Nuns.
Yeah.
And took the money he made from Rock Justice and started Shrapnel Records. And years later, he bought a Rolls Royce, and he asked me, "Do you think the musicians will have the wrong idea if they see me driving a Rolls?" And I said, "Mike, they'll have just the right idea."
That's hilarious. Yeah, but that's 100% accurate, right?
Yeah. And then I remember Marty's living room. Well, it had a good view of the street. I remember one day we were working on Rock Justice, and he looks out the window and says, Bob, it's Grace. Let's hide." And we hid, and she was drunk and throwing bottles against the door. Saying, "Balin, I know you're in there." Anyway, one thing I would love your take on, Jeff, is speaking of the current version of the Starship. Half the acts I see touring are cover bands or tribute bands.
Yeah,
it would have been unheard of back in our heyday, since Mark and I are talking about being old. What do you make of the fact that, I mean, half the acts playing are Tom Petty tribute bands? There's a Wilburys tribute band out. There's probably 7 or 8 Dead tribute bands. What do you make of that phenomenon?
Well, it goes to your Mike Varney Rolls Royce issue that it's about money.
Yeah.
I owned a live music nightclub for about 5 years in San Rafael called the Fault Line. And we did up and coming acts. And like I said, we either got them on the way up or on the way down. We never got them at their peak ever, right? Just basically because of the size of the place. But the thing is that back, like you said, there were very few tribute bands back then. We booked almost all original music, maybe 1 or 2 tribute bands, where most of the people who played in those bands that we booked now are in these tribute bands. And a lot of the tribute bands are actually the same band, just kind of reformulated. And then there's the more ironic point is bands that are actually tribute bands to themselves, where it's members of the band who really were kind of loosely connected to the band doing parts of the band that they used to be in for a moment, right?
One of the guys who was in Rock Justice and sings on the album is a guy named Jeff Pilson.
Yeah.
Docking, but he's been in Foreigner now longer than the original bass player was in Foreigner.
Yeah.
There are no original members in Foreigner.
Right.
So, some of these.
And they haven't released an album in 10 years.
Well,
right?
Exactly. So, I mean, basically Foreigner is a tribute band to Foreigner.
Right.
As are a lot of these. But the fact that that's what's popular, I mean, I guess is it a statement about that there's not a lot of popular new music, or that how great the old music was, or something else?
Well, I think it's an intersection of all of that, right? I said the one thing that, is the old, I remember Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin, of course, when he went on his solo career, for the first 2 or 3 tours, he refused to play any Led Zeppelin material, right? And so the problem was most of the people going there were going to see him because he was in Led Zeppelin. Right. And that's pretty frustrating. And we've all probably seen an artist who refuses to play their hits. The Dead are famous for that. But again, and the thing about the Dead that's always struck me is for the amount of popularity that they have, the amount of records that they've sold is not really as significant. And Jeff is a great example of Dokken. Dokken has sold almost, because he was in Dokken too. I don't, before that, not the founding member, but secondary, one of the second during their main thrust of their career. Yeah. And Dokken has sold almost as many records as Grateful Dead, right? But doesn't have nearly the cultural impact of that.
The Dead, I mean, Touch of Grey was pretty much the only top 10 hit they ever had,
and I believe the only platinum album.
Yeah. But I think it was Bill Graham who once said not only that they were the best at what they do, but the only ones at what they do, but also that you don't need a lot of fans if every fan goes to every show,
right, and buys every record,
buys every record,
right. So again, that's kind of, but that plays into what I'm saying about is that if people want to belong to some of these things, and a band like Petty Theft, for instance, who covers Petty, Tom's dead, unfortunately, and suddenly and tragically. Yeah. But if you want to hear those songs, what's your option, right? Yeah. There's other bands like Deep Purple, for instance, whose second incarnation was just as popular as their first incarnation, but nobody plays those songs anymore. So if you go to see Deep Purple, they're only going to play songs from the band when the singer that's currently in it is. And that's where you have to admire, like the Starship, where they pretty much play everything, right? Yeah. And that was nice to see, right? We're going to play all the songs, all the hits, everything you want. And trust me, the Starship can put together a greatest hits package. It was an awesome show. I was impressed.
Somehow, there's a phenomenon when I lived in Hollywood, down by on Hollywood Boulevard. All of these people would show up as superheroes. So there would be the Batman guy, and there would be the Superman guy, and the Wonder Woman person. But if 2 Batmen showed up, they would get into a fight. I'm surprised that all these tribute bands, that Petty Theft doesn't fight with the other Petty
right
people, and and all the God knows all the Dead. Every night of the week up here in the North Bay, there's a Grateful Dead something.
Yes, well, and I made many jokes about the frequency of dead stories in the publication I write for, because if they sneeze, it's a story, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And again, like I said, but then you look at someone, because Dokken was a local band, right?
Yep.
And it's shocking, like I said, that they don't get the kind of publicity, but that's all part and parcel of that industry, right? It's not just creating a product, just like writing a book. It's not just the writing of the book or creating the song. It's being able to get it out there and consistently deliver it.
Is part of the issue that now with the death of not death of radio, but the fact that everybody can record now, and get a record out, but it's very hard to break through and get mass play. Is that one reason why there aren't the guitar, why the clubs aren't full of younger bands?
Well, there are clubs that do cater to that, but the crowds don't seem to be there. And these festivals are kind of the old Dan the Green mashup plan, right? Where we're going to take 10 bands that don't have the same groups of fans and stick them all together. So then you draw, like when we used to do the nightclub, you try and put thematic bands together. So if you did a heavy metal show, it'd be 3 heavy metal bands. That's kind of how you did it on that level. But you're talking 400 to 500 people. Once you get up to the thousands, you need multiple followings. You can't just, everything's so diversified now. Like you said, radio, nobody listens to the radio anymore. Or if they do, it's streamed. You go and pick the songs and put them together for yourself, which is a very different dynamic. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I just did a friend of mine put together this book for the record, and it's a collection of top 10 album lists from Nish and his friends. Nish is one of the founder or one of the original employees at Yelp. But the point is that I made in the book is, you and I, when we heard a song off an album, we're in our head listening for the next song that follows it, right? The song, whatever the second song is. After Light My Fire, there's going to be, Soul Kitchen or whatever it was. And that doesn't happen anymore at all. Yeah. And so the idea of these concept albums, like you think about Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall, are two of the, massive sales, unbelievable numbers, just unbelievable. And nobody does it. And you wonder why. I don't really have the answer. I know the record industry went through some problems because of Napster originally, and then because of iTunes. Yeah. But now even iTunes has lost its way. I listen to most of my music now on YouTube because I use different devices. And I don't want to download iTunes onto every single thing so that I can do it and then pay a subscription and do all that, when I can just go to YouTube, plug in whatever song I want to hear, and there it pops up. And it's good digital quality, right? Or good enough.
Yeah, exactly. Good enough. Can I get you to talk about your books?
Oh, sure.
How anybody paying attention to our podcast might.
I have a little bit of input, having begun 20 years behind bars, parole denied. The prologue hit me because I did 7+ years of bartending, and you covered that beautifully with the things that make it fun, and then the things that all the hard work. And sometimes the difficulties, because you're around a substance that alters people's behavior. And as bartender, I learned that after one drink, if somebody's on medication, you can get a whole transformation before you even know it's happened, and you are in a whole new realm, and you have to be able to step up and deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's funny. There's a new licensing for bartenders in California called the Responsible Beverage Service License. So for the first time, well, actually not the first time, but for the first time in a long time, bartenders in California have to be licensed, right? They have to take a training and a quiz, and it's a good idea because the book is the rule book is quite extensive, and every time I look through it, I find out something new that I didn't know before. Like I just discovered yesterday while teaching this class and trying to answer a student's question, that the penalty for a bartender being intoxicated is twice what the penalty for serving a minor is. And Mark, as well as I know, there are lots of bartenders who are working intoxicated, right? And it's
back
shocking
in the
to
day,
realize
the bartenders either drank or didn't drink at all.
Yes. Or we're somewhere in between that moment, right?
Well, my last year of bartending, I stopped drinking for a year just to make a point to myself. And it's some point, watching everybody on the other side of the bar sober was another interesting take on
Yes.
the experience. But I also had a question about an article that I think you had on a post on Facebook where it appears that you may have had Lady Gaga in the Buckeye one
Oh
night,
yeah.
and you
Well,
kind of dance around it, but you hint towards the end, yes, it was her. Is
yeah.
that true?
I believe it was, yes. And the
Great.
funny thing is, and this is perfect for this show because nothing made me feel more like an old guy, like
Ah,
realizing I didn't recognize it. Because the problem was I didn't, she came, this couple came in and they sat at the bar, and couples come in and sit at the bar all the time, and she was lively and entertaining. But the one thing that struck me as really peculiar, and I'm not a person who kind of notices this sort of thing, but her eyebrows looked really just strangely dramatic, right? They were very noticeable and very well manicured. And again, that's not something I would notice, right? I'm first of all, I'm colorblind, so I don't notice things that relate to color. But there was just something about it where I went, wow, those are the most meticulously groomed eyebrows I think I've ever seen in my life. And she was playful and interactive, and then she asked me, do we see many celebrities? And I went into my little spiel about, the guys from Metallica or Carlos Santana or Nardo Michael Walden, which I have a funny story to share with you about him. And but I didn't, I was just talking to some random hiking person because she was in, baseball cap and hiking gear. And then she said something strangely specific about Lady Gaga, and I thought it was kind of odd because no one's ever asked me that, right? I'm not of the age where people would think I'm a fan of Lady Gaga, right? Even though I do appreciate some of her songs. But it was funny that kind of stuck with me, and we kind of had a little playful back and forth. And then when she left, I made a passing joke saying, don't forget, make sure you wear the meat dress the next time. And her reaction was not what I expected. She seemed rather shocked, like, uh-oh, kind of and I realized, wait a minute, is that so? I came home, and when my daughter is briefly living with us from her hiatus from, she's an actress in LA, so she's back up here for a while. And I said, what's up with Lady Gaga? Do you have any pictures? And she popped up a picture on her phone, and sure enough, I'm like, uh-oh, I think that was Lady Gaga. And so my joke was, a couple of things might have happened. One, Lady Gaga came in and I didn't recognize her, and or two, Lady Gaga didn't come in, and I think, and these two characters from down the street think I'm some sort of weirdo, right? So that was kind of the thing, because I don't, with celebrity, much like when you worked at the Trident and had all your experiences, you have to be delicate how you deal with that, because that can backfire on you in a heartbeat as a service person, because you might have to wait on them again, and they might not appreciate that, right? So
absolutely.
that's always the thing. The Nardo Michael Walden tie-in is funny because who he's a producer. He was in Jeff Beck's band, great drummer.
He wasn't there, but I was in his house when it was on Gilmartin Drive off Tiburon Boulevard.
Minute
And there
time,
were more Gold Album awards. And are we running out of time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
So I'll
Okay,
cut to the quick, but
sure.
so I've known him, I know him. I doubt he knows me, which is fine because, you meet a lot of famous people. But one day he came into my work and said, hey, Jeff. And I was kind of taken aback that he knew my name. And I said, yeah, hey, Nardo, what's up? And he says, can I take a picture with you? And I
Wow.
said, you want to take a picture with me? And he said, yeah. And I said, sure, but I have to ask you why. And he said, and this is fabulous. He said, my wife is a huge fan of your column in the IJ. And
Oh,
so I
great.
want to show her that I know you.
Oh,
And I thought that
wow.
was
Wow.
funny, which
Very
which
cool.
was hilarious. And the ultimate irony is, as we're standing there holding up the book, taking the picture, I tell him, oh, by the way, you're in the book. So and there's a funny story about him and Carlos and Quincy Jones in the book
And
about them
parole
coming out.
denied.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not there yet.
Yeah. So
I've been through 3 chapters and I'm having a blast.
yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you're enjoying it, Mark.
The book is available on Amazon and your local bookstore?
Yep, you can get it through, Barnes and Noble. It's available pretty much anywhere. It's on Kindle. It's on iBooks. All my books are. So if you just go, if you, as I tell people, you punch in Jeff Barfly, you'll get more stuff than you could possibly want,
including your podcast, right?
including a podcast, which is on iTunes, and it was just featured in the New York Times, which was a big deal.
Oh, congratulations! That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Now the world will know.
Well, a segment of the world.
And as nice and as much as you downplay it, you have very much become a celebrity in your own right as an author. It's really good stuff. And I think what you've done for bartending is you've kind of raised it up a little and put it in a very interesting light.
Well, again, I was shocked when I did the books, the first book, because you have to pitch an idea and you have to get comps. And all the bartenders I've worked with who said, I'm going to write a book, I'm the only bartender when that book came out who actually did, right? From a bartender's perspective, not a book about cocktails, right? As America's Test Kitchen said, more about mixing people than mixing drinks. And I use that all the time because I couldn't have said that better myself.
Oh, that's awesome.
But you also have a personality that supports this. And I'm just going to tease you a little bit about the last chapter I read about the gorgeous woman who came in and you explained the whole vermouth history thing to her. And then when you were done explaining to it, she was like, I'm out of here. and you're
I think I said I've successfully killed any interest she might have had in me.
That was hilarious. Loved it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mike.
Okay. In the last 2 minutes, Mark, any last question you want to ask, or Jeff, any last thing you want to get in?
Jeff, it's all yours.
Well,
Do you
I
have
would say,
anything you want to promote?
Well, I mean, it's not so much promoting. Well, I like what you guys are doing with the podcast, because one of the things that you think about is, just because you haven't heard, I mean, our culture is so based on the new thing, whatever's hip and hot and new. And the thing is, that doesn't mean that what is happening hasn't been happening for a long time and it's not still good, but it just doesn't get reported on as much. And I think that's unfortunate. And the thing is, like we think about music stars, whatever happened to them? Well, maybe they're doing a Broadway show. If it's outside of your milieu, you don't really know what's happened to them. And I encourage everybody to look it up online and follow these people, because a lot of these people are artists and they're still doing stuff. You just don't hear about it as much as you should. And I think that's a shame.
Do you know who Machine Gun Kelly is?
Yes.
Because I caught a documentary and he switched over to rock and roll.
Yeah.
And he may be an up and coming rock and roller that's actually not horrible.
Right. Well,
I think he's extraordinarily pretty good. And what he does to his audience is he just kind of switched into the rock and roll. He goes, well, this actually makes me happy. He was kind of a blue, depressed person doing his rap, hip hop stuff. And now he's a rock and roll artist. And thank God for rock and roll.
Long live rock and roll, right?
Yeah.
Rock is not dead. I don't care what you said
not.
50 years ago.
Yeah.
In 20 years, there can be a Machine Gun Kelly tribute band.
Soon coming, I'm sure.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is the Bob and Mark Olden in the Way comedy podcast with our special guest, Jeff Burkhart. Jeff, thank you so much for doing this. We had a blast.
Well, thank you very much for having me. So it was a lot of fun.
Thank you, guys.